Oh, it's you. Sorry, I was just having tea time. No, I'll just go away. Hi, I'm Josh, your American English guide, and today we're talking about the T sound. No, not that kind of T. This is America, not Britain. No offense, Britain. We love you. And today we're not just talking about the T sound itself, we're talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yes, you. So the good news is that we're going to be following a lot of the same patterns that we have seen with the stop sounds, but the bad news is that it's a little more complicated, especially because the letter T is often used in places where there's actually no T sound. And we will look a little bit at that towards the end of this lesson, but let's get into the details of the actual T sound. First, placement. Just like the D sound, we're not going to touch the teeth. We're not going to be way back here. We're going to go up here, right? There should be a little bump here on the top of your mouth. And we want to be somewhere around there. And so you should have this sort of combination between a little bit of flatness and a good angle. T, T. And you hear that's nice and crisp, and we hear that air, T. But what about the different types? So we do have, like the other stop sounds, a strong or aspirated version. And this, we really want to hear that air, nice and crisp. For example, time, take, Tom, attack, pretend, fatigue. So we see that if it's at the start of a word or in the middle of a word, as long as it's at the start of a stressed syllable, it's going to be nice and strong, nice and clear. Now for the D sound last time, we talked about how there were two weak versions. Are there two weak T's? Well, we'll come back to that in a second. First, we know that there's a glottal stop T sound, so let's talk a little bit first about the glottal stop. And there's actually an extra detail here that you probably were not taught before. First, let's look at a few examples. What, that, meat, foot. So we see here we're going into that T position, but we're closing off that air. We're not pushing the T out. You just kind of hold your breath for half a second. Now the one thing that's different about the T sound for the glottal stop is that there are actually two ways to make it. For all of the other glottal stops, you have to go into the mouth position for that sound, cut it off here, maybe add voice, maybe not, depending on if it's a voiced sound or not. But with the T sound, you actually don't have to go into the T position. If you just close your glottis, you just hold your breath for half a second, and your tongue is pretty much anywhere except in one of the other stop sound positions like the K, then it will sound like a T. Most of the time. Most of the time. Sometimes the difference between these voiceless stop sounds can get a little bit confusing even for natives, but that's on rare occasion and it's usually not a problem. So if I say the exact same words that I just said for the glottal stop T, what, that, meat, foot. Again, make sure you don't hit the glottal stop K position. It can be very similar. If that's too difficult for you, don't worry too much about it. But I do recommend that you try to practice this sort of open position glottal stop T, because the reason it exists is so that we can more quickly and clearly flow from word to word when there is a glottal stop T. Now let's go back to the weak T sound. So we saw with the D, we have, as I teach it, two weak Ds. There's the normal weak D, which is just softer. It's not as strong. D, 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 instead of d. Okay? Like at the start of the word decide, because it's not a stressed syllable. But then we also have the flapped D or tapped D. And this is, again, where you just tap instead of closing and then pushing out. So does the T work the same way? Yes. In fact, it works almost exactly the same way. So there is a soft T sound, which is unaspirated. We don't hear as much air. But this is going to sound almost the same as the strong T sound because of the nature of that t, t, t. It's nice and crisp. So if you try to make that softer, t, 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 it's still going to have that same basic sound, and it might still sound kind of strong, especially at the start of a word. For example, titanium, tenacity, tobacco, mistake. Now you'll notice, if you listen really closely, with mistake, it almost sounds like it's a D sound, kind of. And we saw this with, for example, the P sound when we looked at the word speed. It almost sounds like a B sound. But remember, these are not the voiced versions, they're just special, really soft versions. This is one of the strange things about the S sound, is it tends to soften the stop sounds after it. So just keep that in mind, because you don't want to say mistake. The take part is the stressed syllable. So you would think that it should be strong. But that S in miss is sort of connecting over. That's what S does. It connects with a lot of consonants, even inside words. And so it's more like mistake. So now it sounds like the word steak. And that S just really softens it. Now, just like the D sound, we do have a second weak T. And what do you think that is? Do you think it's a flapped T sound? Well, yes and no. So many teachers will call this a flapped T, right? Because there's a letter T and you flap it or tap it, just like the D. However, in American English, at least, this flapped sound, when it's written with the letter T, becomes a D sound. It turns completely into a flapped D. So when I talk about this, if you see a letter T and it's flapped, I will not call that a flapped T. I call that a flapped D, because it is a flapped D sound. It's just spelled with a T. And we know, if you watch my channel a lot, that we don't want to focus on the spelling so much, we want to focus on your ears. So I think it is a little misleading and unnecessarily confusing to call it a flapped T when it's exactly the same sound, at least in American English. And in addition, if you really want to get that American sound, you have to make this a flapped D. Now the question is, when do we turn the T into a flapped D? And the answer to that is mostly the same as the flapped D written with a letter D. So we know that it's a weak sound, right? This is why I call it the second weak T sound, because it has to be at the start of an unstressed syllable. If, in addition to just being at the start of an unstressed syllable, there is a vowel sound before it and a vowel sound after it, just like with the D sound, it will become a flapped sound. So again, just a flapped D written with a T. For example, total, better, water, little, heating. Now some of those can be very difficult to do. In fact, the flap D itself can be a very difficult sound, but that's okay. You can always practice. Now, I told you last time that if we have a glottal stop D, then if it connects to a vowel, it will become a flapped D. The same thing happens with the T, okay? So, for example, going back to our glottal stop words, what is, that is, meat is, foot is. So we hear that tap, right? What is, not what tis, what is. Now, of course, because it's supposed to be a T, this is where it also gets a little complicated. It always has the potential to come out as a T. There's no 100% guaranteed rule, but 98% of the time, 99% of the time, we're going to make that a flapped D. Sometimes it could even stay a glottal stop. It depends on how I'm speaking, how the rhythm of my speech is going. I could say, what is it? Might come out that way, but usually it's going to be a flapped D. Also in the lesson about the D sound, I told you that if you had a weak D at the start of a word, like decide, and there was a vowel at the end of the previous word plus a vowel sound after it, then you could also tap that D. Potentially, you could flap it. That does not work with the T sound. If you have that T at the start of a word, it doesn't matter if there's a vowel sound before it. If it's weak, it's going to be a soft or weak T sound, not a D sound. Now I want to give you one really interesting example and show you how when we change the stress in a word, like if we go between, say, the verb form and a noun form, and the stress pattern might change, that this actually affects the pronunciation of the T. So we have, for example, the word total and totality. Now in the word total, that first syllable is stressed, so we have a nice strong T, to. But then in the middle, we have the letter T at the start of an unstressed syllable, so it's going to be a flapped D sound, total. But the next word, totality. So that first syllable is now not stressed because we're shifting the stress to the second syllable, making it a weak T. That O in toe is most likely going to reduce to a schwa, t. And then we have the tal. So now instead of total, it's total. And we get that nice strong T sound. Also notice at the end of the word totality, we have a weak T sound between two vowels. So we have itty, totality. So we actually have a strong T and both weak T's in the same word. That can happen. Now before we end this lesson, let's take a very quick look at some examples where the letter T is used, but the sound T is not there at all. We have words like nation, where it is an SH sound. It's not natin or natien or something like that. It's nation. Similarly, in words like mention, which can also be menshin, it could be a CH or an SH. Again, some words might have more than one way to be pronounced. That's okay. Of course, we have words like watch, and this T is just spelling. It's not watch, where there's a T and a CH. It's just a CH sound. Focus on the sound. Watch, watch. Then of course we have the T plus consonant R combination that I talked a little bit about in one of the live streams. For example, the word tree. So it's spelled T-R-E-E, but it's actually pronounced C-H-R-E-E. Tree. And then lastly, of course, we have the TH spelling, which is for the TH sounds, th and th, but there is no T sound, there is no H sound. We know this, but that's another example where you might see the letter T and there's not actually a T sound. So, did I miss anything? Any questions? Let me know. As always, a very special thanks to the English learners just like you who are helping to support English Hacks on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for watching another English Hacks lesson, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, it's you. That was creepy.